Sit back as we tell you a story so terrifying, so unbelievable, that when it first happened, even the police didn't believe it was real. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss stories like this. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to a blinding light in your eyes and the sound of what seems like a stun gun crackling in the darkness. You can't see who's in your bedroom. You can't move. A voice tells you that if you don't do exactly what you're told, you or the person you love will be hurt. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. This is what happened to Denise Huskins and Quinn on March 23, 2015, in their quiet home in Vallejo, California. And what came next was a nightmare that went far beyond that terrifying night. A nightmare that would destroy their lives in ways they never imagined, not because of what the kidnapper did, but because of what the people who were supposed to help them did instead. You're about to discover how an ordinary couple living an ordinary life became the victims of one of the most bizarre and terrifying crimes in modern American history. You'll learn how a decorated Harvard-trained attorney and former Marine became a serial predator who terrorized multiple families. You'll find out how law enforcement not only failed to help the victims but actively destroyed them, accusing them of faking one of the most traumatic experiences anyone could endure. And you'll see how sometimes the real horror isn't the criminal at all. It's the system that's supposed to protect you. The problem began in the most ordinary way possible. Denise Huskins and Quinn were both physical therapists working at the same hospital in Vallejo, California. They met in 2014 and felt an instant connection. Aaron had just come out of a difficult relationship with his ex-fiancée, someone who had cheated on him, and he was struggling to trust again. But Denise saw the good in him. She saw a man worth giving a chance. They started dating, and by early 2015, their relationship was getting serious. Denise was spending more and more nights at Aaron's house, the home he had once shared with his ex before she moved out. On the night of March 22, 2015, everything seemed normal. They spent the evening together, enjoying each other's company, and went to bed. Neither of them had any reason to believe that in just a few hours, their entire world would be shattered. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, they were jolted awake by a bright light shining directly into their eyes and a noise that sounded like a stun gun. Aaron couldn't see anything through the blinding light. A man's voice ordered them to lie face down on the bed. They were paralyzed with fear. This couldn't be happening. Not in their home. Not to them. The intruder instructed Denise to tie Aaron's hands and feet with zip ties. Then he placed blackened swim goggles over both of their eyes so they couldn't see his face. He forced them to put on headphones that played a pre-recorded message, a message that threatened them with violence if they didn't comply. The voice on the recording warned that any resistance would be met with electric shocks or having their faces cut. It was methodical. It was terrifying. And it was clear that whoever was doing this had planned it carefully. The intruder forced Aaron to give up his banking information and passwords. He made Aaron drink a mixture of NyQuil and Valium to sedate him. Then he moved Aaron downstairs to the living room, placed him on a couch, and marked off a square on the floor with red duct tape. The intruder told Aaron that he was being watched by a camera on the wall and that if he left the perimeter marked by the tape, there would be consequences. Aaron was drugged, disoriented, and terrified. He could hear movement upstairs but couldn't see anything through the blackened goggles. And then he heard the worst sound imaginable, the sound of Denise being taken. The intruder put Denise in the trunk of Aaron's car and drove away. Aaron was left alone in the house, bound, drugged, and terrified that he would never see Denise again. Hours passed. Aaron eventually managed to free himself, but he was still groggy from the drugs. The kidnapper had left him a voicemail demanding a ransom and warning him not to contact the police immediately. Aaron was in shock. He didn't know what to do. Should he call the police? What if calling them put Denise in more danger? What if the kidnapper was watching him? Finally, around 2 o'clock in the afternoon on March 23, more than 10 hours after Denise was taken, Aaron called 911. He explained everything that had happened. He told them about the intruder, the goggles, the drugs, the recordings, the kidnapping. He begged them to help find Denise. But instead of launching a search, the police did something that would turn Aaron's nightmare into something even worse. They didn't believe him. Detective Matthew Mustard of the Vallejo Police Department looked at Aaron Quinn and saw a suspect, not a victim. The story was too strange, too elaborate. Why had Aaron waited so long to call the police? Why were there so many bizarre details? Mustard accused Aaron of killing Denise and making up the kidnapping story to cover it up. The interrogation lasted 18 hours. 18 hours of being told he was a liar. 18 hours of being accused of murder. 18 hours of being told that Denise was dead and that he knew she was dead because he had killed her. Aaron was exhausted, traumatized, and starting to doubt his own sanity. He wondered if maybe he was having some kind of psychotic break. Maybe none of this was real. Maybe he really had done something terrible and didn't remember it. The police told him he had failed a polygraph test. They told him his family would be destroyed if he didn't confess. They told him he was a cold, calculated monster who had strangled the life out of Denise and dumped her body somewhere it would never be found. Finally, Aaron's brother Ethan hired an attorney named Dan Russo to get him out of police custody. Aaron was released, but the damage was done. The police had decided he was guilty, and nothing was going to change their minds. Meanwhile, the kidnapper had tried to contact Aaron multiple times while he was being interrogated, but the police had put Aaron's phone on airplane mode. The ransom calls went unanswered. The emails went unread. While the police were busy trying to get a false confession out of Aaron, the real kidnapper was out there with Denise, and no one was looking for her. Denise's ordeal was beyond comprehension. She woke up on a cold floor in what felt like a cabin. She could hear someone moving around, the sound of scrubbing and duct tape being handled. She was still wearing the blackened swim goggles. She couldn't see anything. Every horror movie she had ever watched flashed through her mind. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know who had taken her. She didn't know if she was going to survive. Then the man spoke to her. He told her something that made no sense at all. He said this wasn't meant for her. He said he had intended to kidnap Aaron's ex-girlfriend, Andrea, but had taken Denise by mistake. He told her he used to be in the military and now worked as a kidnapper for hire. He kept her at his cabin in South Lake Tahoe for 2 days. During that time, he raped her twice. He drugged her repeatedly. He kept her blindfolded and disoriented. And then, after 48 hours, he drove her 400 miles south and released her near her parents' home in Huntington Beach. When Denise reappeared on March 25, 2015, the logical response would have been relief. The victim was alive. The kidnapping had been real. Aaron had been telling the truth all along. But that's not what happened. Instead, the Vallejo Police Department held a press conference and accused Denise and Aaron of staging the entire thing. Lieutenant Kenny Park stood in front of cameras and said that the couple owed the community an apology for plundering valuable resources and instilling fear. He compared their case to the movie Gone Girl, which had been released just a year earlier and featured a woman who faked her own kidnapping. The media ran with the story. Headlines screamed about the real-life Gone Girl hoax. Denise and Aaron were dragged through the mud on national television, on social media, in newspapers and magazines. They were called liars, attention seekers, criminals. People who had never met them, who knew nothing about what they had endured, felt entitled to judge them, mock them, and destroy them. Denise had just survived being kidnapped and raped, and instead of receiving support and compassion, she was being publicly humiliated and accused of making it all up. Aaron had spent 18 hours being accused of murder, and now he was being accused of conspiracy to commit fraud. The trauma of the kidnapping itself was horrific, but what the police and the media did to them afterward was, in many ways, even worse. They were victimized twice. once by the criminal and once by the very people who were supposed to help them. But something strange happened next. The kidnapper, apparently feeling guilty about how Denise and Aaron were being treated, sent a series of emails to the San Francisco Chronicle. The emails were long and detailed, nearly 9,000 words in total. They included photos that corroborated Denise's story. The kidnapper said that Denise and Aaron were telling the truth, and that the police and media were wrong to accuse them. He wrote that he could not stand to see two good people thrown under the bus when they should have received only support and sympathy. He said that the operation had gone terribly wrong, that he felt deep remorse and regret, and that he was mortified by the impact he had on Denise. The emails proved that the kidnapping was real. But even then, the police refused to apologize. They continued to stand by their theory that it was all a hoax. 2 months later, the case finally broke wide open. On June 5, 2015, a man wearing a wetsuit attempted another home invasion in Dublin, California, a town not far from Vallejo. This time, the crime was interrupted, and the intruder fled, leaving behind a crucial piece of evidence: his cell phone. Detective Misty Carouzu of the Dublin Police Department recovered the phone and began investigating. What she found was shocking. The phone belonged to a man named Matthew Daniel Muller, a Harvard-trained immigration attorney and decorated former Marine. Carouzu started connecting the dots. She searched a cabin in South Lake Tahoe that belonged to Muller's mother and found a treasure trove of evidence: Denise's hair on a pair of swim goggles, Aaron's stolen laptop, a white Ford Mustang with a GPS system that still had the address where Muller had dropped Denise off in Huntington Beach, drones, wireless camera systems, and various props and tools that matched the descriptions from both the Dublin and Vallejo crimes. Carouzu contacted the FBI. On June 29, 2015, the FBI arrested Matthew Muller for the kidnapping of Denise Huskins. Matthew Muller was not what anyone expected. He was 43 years old, highly educated, and had an impressive resume. He had served in the Marines from 1995 to 1999 and had been honorably discharged. He had gone on to Harvard University, graduating in 2006, and had become an immigration attorney in San Francisco. But by 2015, Muller's life had unraveled. He had been disbarred. He was living in his mother's cabin in South Lake Tahoe, barely sleeping, obsessively watching Batman movies, and spiraling into a severe psychotic episode. He had created a bizarre vigilante identity for himself, wearing a wetsuit and using makeshift weapons built from flashlights, laser pointers, dog collars, swim goggles, spray paint, and toy guns like a Nerf Super Soaker. In his delusional state, Muller believed he was some kind of Robin Hood figure, kidnapping wealthy people for ransom to give to the poor. He believed this was morally justified. He had convinced himself that he was fighting evil, when in reality, he had become the very thing he claimed to be fighting against. The evidence against Muller was overwhelming. He had drugged and kidnapped Denise. He had raped her twice. He had terrorized Aaron. He had caused immeasurable trauma to both of them. And as investigators dug deeper, they realized that Denise and Aaron were not his only victims. Muller had been committing similar crimes for years, possibly dating back to the 1990s. He had invaded homes, held victims for ransom, kidnapped people, and raped or attempted to rape women. And he had gotten away with it for so long because his crimes were so bizarre and so meticulously planned that they seemed unbelievable. Just like the police didn't believe Denise and Aaron's story at first, other victims likely hadn't been believed either, or they had been too traumatized and terrified to report what happened to them. On September 29, 2016, Matthew Muller pleaded guilty to the kidnapping in federal court. He acknowledged using computer-generated voices, blackened swim goggles, liquid sleeping medication, and numerous props in Denise's abduction. On March 16, 2017, he was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. He later pleaded no contest to charges related to the Dublin home invasion attempt and other crimes. But even after Muller's conviction, the Vallejo Police Department refused to apologize to Denise and Aaron. For 6 years, they remained silent, standing by their original statements that the couple had staged a hoax. It wasn't until 2021, when reporters started asking questions again, that the city of Vallejo finally issued a public apology. By then, the damage had been done. Denise and Aaron had spent 6 years living under the shadow of false accusations, 6 years of being known as the real-life gone girl couple, 6 years of having their reputations destroyed and their trauma dismissed. Denise and Aaron fought back. They filed a defamation lawsuit against the Vallejo Police Department and the city of Vallejo. In 2018, they reached an out-of-court settlement for $2.5 million. It was a financial victory, but it couldn't undo the years of pain and humiliation they had endured. Denise described the public shaming as even more traumatizing and devastating than the kidnapping itself. And she was right. The kidnapping was a horrific, life-altering trauma, but it was committed by a mentally ill criminal. What the police and the media did was different. It was a betrayal by the very institutions that are supposed to protect victims and seek justice. It was a failure of the system on every level. Denise and Aaron are survivors in every sense of the word. They survived the kidnapping. They survived the interrogations and accusations. They survived the media circus. And they survived the long, painful process of fighting for justice and vindication. In 2020, they got married. 5 years to the day that Denise was released by her kidnapper, they welcomed their daughter Olivia into the world. They built a life together despite everything that had been done to them. And they refused to stay silent. In 2024, their story was told in the Netflix documentary series American Nightmare, which became one of the highest-rated documentaries of the year. Millions of people around the world watched and were horrified by what had happened to them. The documentary sparked outrage and renewed calls for police accountability and reform. Denise and Aaron have used their platform to advocate for other victims. They work with law enforcement agencies to educate officers on science-based interviewing techniques, hoping to prevent other victims from being treated the way they were. They collaborate with prosecutors, psychologists, and experts to highlight the failures in their case and push for systemic change. They know they were lucky in many ways. They had family support. They had the resources to hire attorneys. They had each other. Many victims don't have those advantages. Many victims are destroyed by the system and never recover. Denise and Aaron are determined to make sure that what happened to them doesn't happen to others. Matthew Muller remains in federal prison, serving his 40-year sentence. But even from behind bars, his crimes continue to haunt his victims. In 2025, nearly 10 years after Denise's kidnapping, Muller confessed to additional crimes, including another kidnapping for ransom that occurred just 2 weeks after he released Denise. That family had been so traumatized that they never reported it, fearing he or other attackers would come back. The Contra Costa District Attorney's Office filed new charges against Muller based on his confessions. Denise and Aaron believe he committed many more crimes that remain unsolved, that there are more victims out there who are still living in fear, still wondering if their attacker will come back, still too afraid to come forward because they think no one will believe them. The story of Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn is a horror story, but not in the way you might expect. Yes, there was a terrifying home invasion. Yes, there was a kidnapping and sexual assault. Yes, there was a deranged criminal who terrorized innocent people. But the real horror was what came after. The real horror was being victimized again by the people who were supposed to help. The real horror was being publicly shamed and accused of lying about one of the most traumatic experiences imaginable. The real horror was realizing that the system designed to protect victims can sometimes destroy them instead. When Detective Mustard interrogated Aaron for 18 hours, when the FBI told him he had failed a polygraph test, when Lieutenant Park held a press conference and accused the couple of staging a hoax, they were all acting on assumptions, biases, and outdated interrogation techniques that prioritize getting confessions over finding the truth. They had decided what they believed happened, and no amount of evidence was going to change their minds. They were more interested in being right than in being just. And in their rush to close a case they didn't understand, they became villains in their own right. Denise and Aaron's nightmare lasted far longer than the 48 hours Denise was held captive. Lasted years. It lasted through interrogations and accusations, through media mockery and public humiliation, through lawsuits and settlements, through the slow, painful process of trying to rebuild their lives and reputations. And even now, with Matthew Muller behind bars and their story told to millions, the scars remain. They carry the trauma of what was done to them, not just by a criminal, but by a system that failed them at every turn. If you found this story as shocking and infuriating as we did, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn survived the unthinkable, not once but twice. They were the victims of a real-life nightmare, and then they became the victims of the very people who should have believed them and protected them. Their story is a reminder that sometimes the worst horror doesn't come from the monster in the dark. Sometimes it comes from the people who are supposed to turn on the lights. And that's a lesson we should never forget.